Hi, and welcome to the Belonging Project podcast. Today I'm with Carol Paddison. Hi, Carol.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course, it's my pleasure. Whereabouts are you based in the UK, Carol?
I'm based in Hitchin, North Hertfordshire, so I'm about 30 minutes train ride into London.
Right. So, Carol, you're the co founder of Fractional Human Resources, which provides strategic people and HR partners to startup and scale ups. You are working on delivering the right level of support at precisely the level that people need and where they are in their growth journey. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you do. Perhaps are there specific sectors that you partner with? And just how does it work, practically speaking?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So I recently set up Fractional Human Resources after working as a people leader for about 20 years, mostly with small to medium businesses. I guess what I realized in that time is that often when you're a much smaller business, you need different levels of HR support at different times. So sometimes you need someone that's really operational, but then other times you need someone really strategic. However, if you've only got one person, it's hard to find that person that can be all of those things. So what Fractional Human Resources does is gives smaller businesses the ability to have access to a full HR function at different levels exactly when they need it. So if you only need some strategic support kind of once a month, then you'll get that from me. Or if you need a lot more admin support, then you'll get that from someone who works with my team. So I tend to work really with tech businesses and professional services businesses and businesses that work remote or hybrid, because that's where I find the model works best.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it's really fascinating to have a team of experts, right, in the HR field that you can access when you need that help, that support, that expertise. I'd love to know a little bit about your journey in the HR space, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. I fell into HR about 20 years ago now after doing a few kind of operational roles in retail and hospitality. And I've worked the last 20 years really with quite a diverse range of organisations. So really started off in the retail and hospitality space and that service industry where you're delivering that kind of, that direct service to the customer and much bigger corporate businesses and hotel chains. And then I just fancied something really different and I moved into a really small startup called Soap and Glory, which is a beauty business. And it was just opened up a different world for me and I absolutely loved being able to go in and just set up the HR function from scratch, design everything, how you wanted it to be. So I've really spent the last kind of 10 years in that space of the smaller to medium sized startup and scale up businesses, either setting up functions from scratch or going in maybe when the business is going through a bit of a transition and needs something different. So I'd really call myself a generalist, but it's much more that kind of size of business that appeals to me.
And what makes it appealing?
I think it's just the range of stuff you get to do. No 2 days are the same, especially when you're in a startup or a scale up. The pace is fast. You often have to pivot and change direction, and I love being able to do that. And I love being able to work with a team to create something quickly to enable that business to be successful. I'm just a bit nosy. So I think when you've got a smaller business, you're less than say 250, you really get to know people within the business. You get to know everyone, you get to know what's happening everywhere. It's a lot easier to take like a really kind of broad view and be involved in lots of different things. I enjoy that about smaller, medium businesses.
Yeah, I can resonate with that. You get involved in many interesting projects.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask your thoughts, Carol, on what's the difference between HR and people or people and culture? We have seen different terminology. What are your thoughts on the differences?
Yeah, I think this is a really debated topic still, like the difference between HR and people functions and what they do. And I guess traditionally, HR was seen as very policy driven, very procedural, very kind of compliance based, and almost a cost center for the business. Whereas teams that are using the people title are much more around kind of much more forward thinking, so much more data informed, thinking more about how they create and build culture that enables the business to be successful rather than restricts them, and certainly seen as a function that would help grow the business rather than be a cost center. I guess my view on it is that the titles are still interchangeable. It might be an unpopular opinion. However, how the function works and what they deliver is the differentiator. And I'm almost quite proudly taking the human title back for my business. I've called it fractional human resources, because I think the human element is what we're also really good at as people professionals. We're amazing at understanding people and human behavior, and we're highly intuitive. Most great leaders, people leaders I know are have huge amounts of empathy, so that human piece is really important. So yeah, I guess I'm less precious about the title and more interested in thinking how the function's designing itself.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. I really sense that it has to be human centric, and that's really what matters, irrespective of how we want to call it. And perhaps there is, value or resonance in aligning the title of the function, the name of the function, with the business values or mission. What would you say would be, or rather, what are the top differences that come to mind when you think of human resources in startups and scale-ups versus larger organizations, multinationals, and that sort?
Yeah, in terms of kind of how you might build it and think about it.
Yes.
I think I'm a big believer in starting things really simple and building things that are simple to start off with, and getting feedback from your customer as you being the employees as you would a product, and then iterating as you start to scale. So rather than in a big organization where you might have something like a really complex career framework, actually in a small business, you can design something that's much simpler, a few levels, and then that can develop as you grow. So often, like, as I said at the start, the pace is different. You want to get things out the door and shipped more quickly. So think about, like, what's the minimum, I like the term minimum lovable product. If you've heard that one, it's Jessica Zwan's. But what's the minimum lovable product I can build in that startup that works for us right now, that people will enjoy using or being part of, that we can then scale later?
Yeah. So we're here to talk about belonging. What would you say would be different levers or ways, tools that are used to foster belonging within startups and scale-ups?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think the difference to big organizations, I guess, is often in bigger organizations, what I've seen is it's very kind of initiative led, or you might have a whole function or definitely a role or two that is purposefully designed around kind of building initiatives for belonging and inclusivity. And I think in a startup, I think it's more about thinking about what you're doing and making it part of what you're doing on a day-to-day. So belonging, if we're thinking about something as simple as like onboarding a new starter, how can we think about belonging as part of that? How do we get to know that new starter and make sure that they feel part of the team quickly? How do we understand what their strengths are and understand how they learn, so we can adapt work to suit them? So you can have I think it's much easier often to have a much kind of closer relationship and get to know people quite quickly, and thinking about it as part of the processes that we're designing anyway, rather than a separate kind of add-on to something.
Yeah. And how is that different, you think, from how we foster belonging in large organization? Is that about that add-on? What would you say is different?
I think it's less about having this like these big initiatives around, I don't know if it's you're trying to get more women into tech, or you're trying to build a family friendly work culture. I think in big organizations you'll often see like a big drive around that and a big initiative, and that's how we're going to make those demographics feel included here. I don't think in a small company, you know, that might only be a really small proportion of your workforce if you're talking about working parents, for example. So just thinking more kind of holistically about, well, what can we design that's going to make everyone feel like they belong and it's inclusive? So using things like flexibility is probably my favorite one. You know, if we create a really flexible organization where you can work flexibly around timings and work flexibly around location, you know, hybrid at home, etc., that's straight away that's going to help a lot of people feel part of your business because they can work around their children or work around Ramadan at the moment. You know, flexibility really obviously helps a lot with that. So thinking about these kind of broader initiatives that you can weave into how you work.
And flexibility is such a great example, I feel like, because it's something that the company can offer without having to put in extra budget, extra resources, I think. And that's often something that could be a bit of a struggle with startup and scale ups if we want to implement something new, or if there's, if there's a program we want to launch. I mean, we would love to, but then there isn't any budget left this year, or we don't have the resources yet to do that. So looking into things like flexibility, as you said, could be a great one to make sure that, so we are offering the flexibility, we are making it work for people that might find it probably challenging or difficult to fit in that 9 to 5 mold, or to feel that actually they belong in that mold when there is other variables to juggle with.
Yeah, something as simple as in a previous organization, we implemented flexible bank holidays. So you could take all 8 of your UK, you know, they're on UK holidays traditionally. You could take all 8 of those and you could take them whenever you wanted in the year. You didn't have to use those days. So if you didn't want to take Easter because maybe you don't celebrate Easter, you could take it at another time. It costs absolutely nothing. It's so easy to implement. It's just putting the bank holidays on another day. It takes little effort, and it was just so well received because it's actually, we're just thinking a bit broader about what people's needs might be, and rather than someone having to maybe ask for something special that makes them then feel like they don't belong, like, actually, you know, can I take this day because it's a celebration that's important for me? They've just got the flexibility to use those days.
Yeah,
So there's lots of things like that, as you say, really cost nothing or cost effective, that you can implement and make a huge difference to how people feel about working for you.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. And with that example, we are actually being quite inclusive as well, and probably sending a strong message to those individuals, you know, in the sense of, okay, so perhaps you celebrate Ramadan, and if you want to take some time off, you know, for that day or that other day because of what you celebrate, that absolutely fine. Please do so, which I think it just makes us feel much more included and seen and heard for what we are and what we celebrate. What would you say is the role of the HR team in fostering belonging?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think we've got a really key role in the business in terms of people and HR leaders to play in thinking about that and making sure we're creating the right opportunities or coaching managers around thinking about it. So we tend to be the ones that set up a lot of kind of processes or ways of working that we can adapt to help with this. So again, really simple, but if you're putting in, most places do things like one-to-ones, and often it'll be the people or the people team. I use the word people or HR team that are kind of sharing how to run a one-to-one and coaching managers around it, and maybe even building a template in the system that the managers use. If we're thinking about something like a one-to-one, actually just taking time at the start of every one-to-one to check in with people and ask how they're doing is a really important part of making people feel like they belong. So as part of the people team, again, it's like weaving that into what we're doing. So let's build that in, and let's coach managers that's kind of key. And also, I think like leading the way on some of it is, I always try and role model this myself. So every time I've got a workshop, I take the first 5 minutes to do a check-in and see how everyone is, and get people to share how they're turning up today and what's going on for them. And without saying you should all do this, people start to say, oh, that works really well, and start adapting things organically too. So I think you can think about how you lead in the space and in small businesses, whichever role you're in the people team, you're likely to have quite a big influence there.
Yeah. And what about leadership? Leadership in startups and scale-ups. Often they're described as more approachable, they're more hands-on. What's their role in fostering belonging?
Yeah, I think they've got the most important role in fostering this. And vulnerability for me is really kind of key in thinking about their style as a leader and how vulnerable they're prepared to be with their teams. So I guess by vulnerable, what I mean is able to, admit that they don't know everything, or share with the team when they made a mistake or did something wrong. Because by showing that vulnerability, actually you're showing your human side, and you're saying, hey, it's okay if you make a mistake, because I've done that. So leaders they need to sometimes push themselves out of the comfort zone to do that, and it doesn't always come naturally. Most people don't particularly like standing there in front of the team and saying, hey, I did that wrong. But it really will help influence the team in terms of how they operate and how comfortable they are. But those things, I think, really do start to create that sense of belonging and being human in the workplace. Also, for me, transparency is really key as leaders, and more transparent we can be about where we've made decisions and how we do things, that invites people in to ask questions and show that actually we're sharing and we want input into things. And again, giving people a voice is a kind of really key way to help people to feel they belong in an organisation. They've had the opportunity to share how they feel and feel part of decisions.
Yeah. And the vulnerability piece, the authenticity piece is often talked about now. And I think, to your point, when leaders are able to show those traits, or rather when we can see those traits in leaders, it definitely helps in us feeling safe to be, to express our own voice, perhaps bring our ideas, opinions to the table. And if we feel safe to do so, then belonging is usually what comes next. Yeah. We are hearing more and more about some organizations pushing for people to be back in the office and letting go of their hybrid way of working that perhaps was in place since the pandemic. Are you seeing this in your work? What do you think is going to be the impact on our sense of belonging to the workplace?
I think definitely seeing it more in kind of HR and people networks that I'm part of, that people are talking about hey, we've got to get people back to the office more often, or, a full-time return to the office, and how do we manage that? So it's definitely a big kind of topic still. And I think there is still a bit of a move towards that I'm seeing. Organisations I've been working with have have been very kind of really embracing hybrid and it working. And I guess I'm intentionally looking for those businesses, but yeah, I agree that's happening. And I think this is where it's a really careful balance between thinking about actually what have you said are your aspirations and goals in the DEI space and in things like belonging against what you potentially creating by doing this, because if you're a carer or somebody that maybe has got longer term health issues, or there's lots of people that actually being flexible around where they work can really help them, and feeling forced to come into the office every day is, as well as the things around, it costs more money and commuter time. Actually, for some people, it's just not practical to do. So I think it's got to be thought about really carefully. And I think the businesses that are doing hybrid the best are the ones where they're like co-creating it with their employees. So they're being really intentional about, actually, we think, in-person time's valuable and this is why, but we want to make that work, and, they're working together instead of kind of placing a directive on people. Because then again, people feel that they're part of that, and I think most people understand about why they might need to go into an office to collaborate and do things in person. If you can make people feel involved in that decision and they've got a say and they can share, what maybe the barriers for them are, then it feels much more inclusive. You feel much more like you're part of it and you belong.
Would you say that this push to the office, is it also happening in startups and scale-ups? What have you seen?
I think it's across businesses. I think the ones that we obviously see in the media are the bigger organisations, because it doesn't make news as much if 50-person tech businesses doing it. But, Amazon wants everyone back. That's 5 days a week. That's going to make headlines. I think it can vary. I've seen it definitely more from the bigger corporates, but I've heard about smaller businesses that people to be back at the office more. However, I do think probably the tech businesses are, because of the work they do, they're able to be more flexible around that, and it's much easier to work from home with a lot of those roles. So I think it varies for small businesses.
Yeah, makes sense. Perhaps coming back on belonging and the HR function, you've mentioned some ways that HR could foster belonging in the workplace and in the organization. I'm curious, how does belonging show up or come up? Is it something that is typically discussed? Is it part of HR objectives as a function? Or is it more situational, context-led? Perhaps there's been a situation in the business that we are trying to help with or solve. What would you say? What are your thoughts on this?
I think it varies between businesses. Where I've seen it work really well is where, and a couple of businesses I've worked at recently, they've got something around inclusion or belonging as part of their core values. So as a people team, those core values are there to guide how we make decisions and do things within the business. So when we're then setting our people team goals or roadmaps for the quarter or for the year, actually we're then using that as a kind of guiding light to say, well, this initiative that we've planned or this goal we've talked about, is that inclusive, or does it tie back to our value of belonging? So that's, if it is something that is really important to your business and you make part of your values, that really kind of helps keep it front of mind, I guess, and practice it within the business. Otherwise, if it's not in your values, because values, you might not have a specific one that calls out belonging or inclusivity. As a people team, I think it's important to every quarter or every 6 months, sit down and think, like, what are the things that we're hearing in the business that we really want to focus on, and belonging's really, for me, the reason that's important is because it's actually what we're trying to do in the people function is help the business commercially be successful. And, I think the best way businesses can do that is to have more diverse voices around the table. So our goal, in the people team is looking at kind of the goals that we're setting and making sure all of those are given the opportunity to have diverse thoughts and perspectives in them.
I love that. So there isn't one size fits all answer. It very much depends. And that's great to see and to hear, actually.
Yeah, I think, I think sometimes you might have really intentional goals around actually we really need to increase the amount of women in our engineering team. And that might be a specific thing you're focusing on. And, that's probably been driven by some data that you've got when you've looked at your kind of gender balance in that team. So I think, there will be often occasions where you have a much more targeted approach. I suppose my caution always around that is then, you have this big initiative around getting more women into the engineering department, but then it gets forgotten in the next half. Whereas if you're actually thinking about how do we weave this in to what we do all of the time, then it kind of lives in the business a lot more.
Yeah. How much would you say our personal experiences with belonging help us shape how much importance we give to belonging in the workplace, especially when we work in the HR function?
Yes. Yeah, great question. I think your personal experiences probably impact everything that you do in most roles, but I guess the privilege we've got in HR is we're able to use that to shape things wider in the business. So if you've got a personal experience of maybe feeling like you've not belonged or where you've belonged somewhere and felt really comfortable, I think being able to take that and use it to help inform things that you're doing in the function is really, is going to, one, be helpful, but two, come from a place that's kind of really genuine as well. And I imagine like most people have felt that they don't belong at some time in their life, whether it's back at school or as a young adult. I think most people, not just in a people role, but most people have probably got something if they think back that they can think about and help them relate to this. It's just maybe, again, our role as people leaders is to how do we bring that to life in the business?
Yeah, that's great. Great stuff. Thank you so much, Carol. How could people get in touch with you if they have a question about fractional human resources or about you and your experience? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
I'm on LinkedIn. It's probably the best way to get in touch with me, Carol Paddison. So if you look me up on there, I'm always happy to connect and talk about fractional HR with you. And I'd love to talk more about belonging as well.
Fantastic. We'll include in the show notes your LinkedIn page so people can get in touch with you directly. Thank you so much for being on the podcast with me, Carol. It's been a pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and or Spotify and share this episode with your friends and network. As an independent podcaster, your reviews and engagement really supports the podcast. We also stream on Substack, where you can join in for extra content and conversations on today's topic and much more.